Great. Okay. So again, welcome to the DGC's Introduction to Mapping tutorial. I'm Karen Gabriel. I'm the training coordinator at the DGC BC. But I do want to mention that prior to working at the Guild, I worked in locations. So I do have experience with creating call sheet maps, which is what we're going to talk about today. We are recording this webinar, but we can't see or hear you, so you will not be recorded. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm going to do a short presentation followed by a short demonstration. If you have questions, we ask that you type them in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to stop after the presentation to answer those questions. And then I'll do the demonstration, and then I'll answer any additional questions that you might have. So speaking of the demonstration, I want to point out that I will be showing you the basics of drawing maps and not how to use a particular software application. So in this tutorial, what we're going to cover is we're going to get down to basics. What is a call sheet directional map? Why do we need call sheet directional maps? What sort of elements you want to include on a directional map? Design considerations. The best type of software to use to create a directional map, although again, I won't be teaching you how to use software, just talking about what types of software you'll want to be using to create the maps. Some tips for success, and then again, at that point, I'm going to stop for questions, and then I'll do a short demonstration of how to actually draw a call sheet map. So first of all, very basic question, what is a directional map? Well, the directional map is something that you'll see attached to the call sheet, and it provides driving directions, both the visual and written directions, from the production office to crew park. Most often, it also provides directions from the hotel at which the producers and cast are staying. Often it's the Sutton Hotel downtown. Everyone in the crew, plus background performers, receive copies of these maps. So why do we need directional maps? And I know this question gets asked a lot, especially when everyone carries a cell phone with Google Maps. But there are some good reasons. The obvious reason is to guide the crew to the correct location by providing the address and written directions. The map also includes important contact information for the ALM in case people get lost, for the production office, and for the nearest hospital, which is very important. There are some other reasons to provide crew with directional maps, because maps will show a preferred driving route. They'll keep crew in the zone or limit driving out of the zone if that's an issue. They'll prevent the crew from driving into sensitive neighborhoods or to avoid some major road construction. They'll provide the correct directions if Google Maps is wrong. And I was on a show where Google Maps was wrong, and the crew who didn't follow the directions on the directional map actually got lost. And remember, not everyone is from BC. We have people coming from all over the world to work here in film, and they may not be familiar with the locations. So it's very helpful for them to actually have the production office provide them with exactly where the location is. And directional maps can include information that Google Maps doesn't, such as where catering is and where background processing is. So what do you include on a directional map? If you look at directional maps from different productions, you'll notice that they all include the same types of information. You start with your map. You add your locations. So in this case, it would be crew park, the production office, and the hotel. You add your visual driving directions from the production office to crew park. You add your visual driving directions from the hotel to crew park. And you add your written directions from the production office to crew park and from the hotel to crew park. For me, this is where I would also include the ALM's name and phone number in case a crew member got lost and needed to call for assistance. But you will want to check with your ALM as to where exactly they want to have that information on the map. You'll also add the production's directional arrow so that the crew know which directional signs to look for. As an ALM, I had calls from people who were following the wrong directional arrow and obviously didn't make it to set. So it's important to have that on the map. Add the production title, the episode information, if applicable, the date, addresses for the set crew, for crew park, circus, and in this case, we've got a BG processing, and of course, the nearest hospital information. You should always orient your map so that north is at the top of the map, and you want to indicate that by including a north arrow on your map so people can orient themselves. You should also include the wording map not to scale and not all roads are shown. Your maps will generally never be 100% realistic, as you'll probably need to stretch them or compress them to fit the route that you're drawing. You'll also want to include major roads on your map, but definitely not all roads, because it'll take you forever to draw your map. As you'll usually include an insert map of the location along with the directional map, you should indicate that the directional map is one of 2 or 3 or more in case of company moves. Other details you may want to include are maybe a detail map that shows a close-up of the parking location. So if you're going from a studio that's very far from your crew park, you may want to give people a zoomed in version of exactly where the detail of that crew park is so that they can find it easier. You can also include specific warnings or cautions, such as speed limits. I tended to like including a message about no personal vehicles on set because parking is always at a premium. So we want to make sure that people use the crew park that we're paying for and aren't clogging up the neighborhood's parking. A lot of times, if you've got a particularly long shuttle time from crew park to set, you may want to include that information as well. And you could also include, and I've seen other people do this, that you can include the travel time from the production office to crew park. But be really careful when doing so, because you have to take into consideration the time of day that crew will actually be traveling and what the traffic will be like. So let's talk a little bit about the design considerations. There are a few things that you should keep in mind when creating your map. So just going back to the complete map we were just looking at, the best maps are simple, clean, and easy to read. Use a very simple font with minimal color and keep the focus on the directions. Again, north is at the top of the map. And in terms of size, maps are always the same size as the call sheet. They're legal size, 8.5 by 14 inches, and they're usually oriented landscape or horizontal. But in some cases, you can orient them in portrait orientation or vertical if necessary. Notice again that the main focus is on the driving route, and all other information is anchored to the edges of the page. I always just did my maps in black and white with some gray for the water, and I didn't use any color. Color can tend to make the file large, and it can make it look cluttered if you overdo it. But if you do want to use color, we suggest that you use no more than 3 colors. But also keep in mind, though, that if the production office prints the maps, they will print them in grayscale, which could look kind of muddy and difficult to read if you originally had your map in color. Always, always check for typos, double and triple check addresses and the date. A good idea is, if you're working as a PA right now or working in productions in whatever capacity and you think you're going to be drawing maps eventually, pay attention to the call sheet maps that you receive on the shows you work on and see which ones are easiest to read and follow so you can get some good ideas for the next time that you actually have to draw a map. So we're just going to briefly talk about software. There are a number of software programs available to use to draw a call sheet map, and it's important to use a vector software program because it enables you to adjust the size of your map without losing quality. The most popular vector software programs that I know of that people use to draw maps include Adobe Illustrator, Microsoft Visio. Now both Illustrator and Visio are fairly expensive. Inkscape, which is a free software, and I've fiddled around with it a little bit, and it does have a lot of the same features and abilities as Illustrator. So that's the one I would recommend if you're just starting out. I'm a PC person, so those are the ones I know of. Inkscape, from what I understand, works on PCs and Macs, and I know people who use Mac computers, they'll tend to use EasyDraw for drawing maps. So what is vector software? Vector graphics are comprised of paths, which are defined by a start and an end point, along with other points, curves, and angles along the way. So they can be scaled to a larger size and not lose any image quality. So you can take that small star and you can increase it to the large one and it still looks crisp and clear. The other advantage of vector software is that it allows you to use layers. And when I'm doing my demonstration, I'm going to show you the benefit of using layers, how it can make your life a lot easier. So just to compare what a non-vector image looks like. So non-vector images are just made up of little dots and cannot be scaled to a larger size without losing image quality. It's kind of like a newspaper, cartoon, or image. You just see all the tiny little dots. So if you take the smaller star, which looks really nice and crisp, and you blow it up, it just starts to look very fuzzy and difficult to read, especially if you're talking about print. So this kind of looks ugly, but here's an example of the base map that I use to customize for different locations and production offices. If this is the first time you're starting to draw maps, consider drawing a map that covers as much of the greater Vancouver area as possible if that's where you are going to be filming, or cover as much of the area that you're going to be filming in typically, if that's Okanagan or the island. So this map can serve as your base map and you can reuse it over and over again. So whether your show is based out of, for example, Bridge Studios in Burnaby or the North Shore Studios in North Vancouver or Martini Studios in Langley, you can use that same map. So when you use a vector program, you can resize the map without the loss of quality. You can zoom in or out of specific areas and make the map easier for the crew to read. So here's kind of that same map, but zoomed in to show the North Shore. You can see that the image is still sharp and the text is easy to read. On the other hand, if you don't use vector formats, then you zoom in and you can see how fuzzy and unreadable it is compared to the vector version. So just to review a little bit about the key software features you want to look for. So you want something that gives you a vector file format, which would be SVG, EPS, PDF, or Adobe Illustrator, not JPEG or PNG. You want layers, and again, I'm going to show you how layers can really be your friend when I do the demonstration. You'll need some sort of drawing tool, like Illustrator has the pen tool. Inkscape has what's called a Bezier tool, which basically works the same as the pen tool. You'll want to be able to fill shapes and also type text. And you'll need to be able to convert your file to a PDF for the production office because that's the format they need to distribute to everybody. So just some quick tips for creating call sheet maps. This is from my experience and you might find that they work for you or not. Start early. They can be time consuming, particularly when you're just starting out. Make sure you talk to your production coordinator to find out when they need your call sheet maps. Some don't need them until like right before wrap. I was on a show where they needed them like the day before. And I think that was because they had a new office PA who just needed time to figure out what they were doing with call sheets. You may need to get your map, well, you'll definitely need to get your map approved from your location manager, and in some cases, your production manager. So again, make sure you start early so that you have time to give it to them for approval. And as I showed you, like I did, make a large base map that covers as much of your filming area as possible and just keep reusing that map. Make sure you take traffic into consideration when deciding your routes and talk to your ALM and your location manager to find out what they recommend. They've often been to the locations and they know if there's any difficulties along the way. When the first job I worked at, when I worked as a TAL, the other TAL told me that I should drive the route all the time. You probably won't have time to be driving all of the routes, so you can kind of walk the route in Google Maps, or again, talk to your LM and your ALM because they can give you a lot of feedback onto what the best route is. Create a style for yourself so that you're not reinventing the wheel each time you draw a map. Use the same font types and common features on every map. My style is actually borrowed from the first TAL that I worked with on my first job as a TAL. And I really liked his style, and I thank him to this day because I thought his maps were beautiful. Mine aren't nearly as beautiful as his, but at least it gave me a starting point from which to start. If you're a nerd like me, pay attention and save other call sheet maps on the shows that you work on. So you can get a lot of ideas and inspiration from other call sheet maps. And you will need to convert your map to a PDF for distribution. If the production office is providing paper copies for the crew, you'll want to use settings that are suitable for printing. So that's basically the end of the presentation. So just to summarize a little bit about what we've covered, we have talked about what an actual call sheet directional map is and why we need them. I've talked a little bit about the elements to include on a directional map and some design considerations that you need to think about when you're drawing your map. I've given you some tips about the best type of software to use to create a directional map, and also I've given you a few tips for success. So before I start the demonstration, I will take some time to answer questions that may have come up in the Q&A. So let me just stop sharing my screen. And let's see if we have anything. No, no one's asked any questions. If there's any questions, now is the time to type them in. So the question is, where did you get your base map from? I drew that. I drew that map. It started actually kind of very small, and then I kind of Frankensteined different maps together to finally get kind of a base map. So if you were to compare that to what an actual Google map of the Vancouver mainland looks like, they wouldn't really match the same. But anyway, so yeah, I did draw that, and it took quite some time. So give yourself time. Any other questions? Okay, this might be a really short presentation, which is great. We can all get out and enjoy that wonderful summer rain that we keep getting. So let me just get on my presentation. Someone is asking, are the free apps not as good? Would you say it's worth getting the paid one? I know people who use Inkscape, and I have tried it, and I think it's just as good. I think it's just as good as Illustrator for what you need to do for maps. I'm not proficient at Inkscape because I used to have a printing company, so we had the full creative Adobe Creative Suite that I purchased for the company, and I still have that Creative Suite. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to be supported because it's really, really old and it's a little bit clunkier than the newer versions. But I'm comfortable with the Adobe suite of products, so that's what I use. But Inkscape, I've played with that, and to me, for free, it's awesome. Another question, what do you use to convert your maps into PDF files? The program itself should allow you to save it as a PDF. Like if you've got Word and you want to save your Word file as a PDF, you should have an option to save it as a PDF in whatever program you're using. Another question, do productions usually pay for your software or not? I've never asked a production to pay for my software, and I don't know anybody that has asked for the production to pay for their software. You could ask, but I would think that if you want to just play around with Inkscape, or I know Macintosh, like Macs have maybe some better design software. That's what Macintoshes were sort of developed for in the first place, was graphic design. So so if you're using a Mac, like I always sort of envied the people who use Macs because they seem to have a bit of an easier time with drawing maps. But I would talk to your production. Oh, someone's saying they can pay for your software, but you can claim it on your tax return. Can you work on maps created in Illustrator on Inkscape? That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't tried. So that would be something I would kind of have to fiddle with. I think you could probably import a PDF into Inkscape and play with that, but you wouldn't have the same functionality. Why can't we only depend on Google Maps in this age of technology? Yeah, that's a good question. But as I mentioned in the presentation, your directional maps have more information than what you would find on Google Maps. And sometimes, like, I know I'm not from BC, and when I first started as a PA, I actually did really rely on those directional maps. I would use Google and my GPS in my car to guide me to where I wanted to go, but I would double check to make sure that I was going to the right place, that I hadn't accidentally input the wrong address in and end up somewhere who knows where. And it also has like all the other information. Like, it's a really quick grab for people, you know, where catering is, where BG processing is, and all those other kind of details, where the nearest hospital is. Even though they're on the call sheet, it's just really easy to see it in the on the call sheet map. And it could be that we might be moving to a point where there aren't any call sheet maps, like the paper ones, or even if you PDF it and you send it to people. But until that point, we'll still teach you how to do maps. Another question is there a database for maps of the Lower Mainland or other popular areas that can be edited? Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any. I really wish there were. I've thought about sharing my base map, but it's in Illustrator. And if I could figure out how to get it into Inkscape, maybe that's something I'll play with, and I'll see if I can get it into Inkscape and I can share it somewhere where people can get it. Because yeah, it can be a real task creating those maps. So let me take a look at that a little bit. Any other questions before I dive into this demo? And please don't judge me. I'm not a super user when it comes to the Adobe products, but I know what I need to know to get the job done. I do remember that when I started, I was a PA, and I did start very late in my career. But when I started as a PA, I just wanted to know, how on earth do I start drawing a map? Like, where do you even begin? And I'm going to show you what I would have wanted somebody to show me when I was a TAL. I did present this at the last TAL class that we ran in person, which was in January before everything shut down, and it seemed to go over okay. So, okay, so let me just see if there's any other notes I want to give you before we start the demonstration. Okay, so as I mentioned, I work on a PC computer, and I use a very, very old version of Adobe Illustrator. And I'm going to do the demonstration in Illustrator because that's what I feel the most comfortable with. But whether you use a PC or a Mac or Illustrator or EasyDraw or any other application, the principles are basically the same. And for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to use Vancouver Film Studios as the production office, and the Tapestry lot, which is, I always use the address is 1001 Station Street. That always seemed to get me to the right place. So that'll be the crew park. To save time, what I've already done is I've already gone into Google and I've done a snapshot of the map, and I've created the route in Google that I want to use. When I first started drawing maps, someone told me that the route should always have the fewest turns. And I have always stuck to that principle, and it seemed to work really well for me. Check with your LM and your ALM to see, again, to talk about the routes and how they suggest that you should guide crew to the location. They might have certain requirements or suggestions, especially if you're dealing with like out of the zone. So let me start sharing my screen here, and let's see how this goes. Okay, So this is Adobe Illustrator. And I'm going to start with a new file because I've been playing with this a little bit already. I've already got it set to legal size, which is 14 inches wide by 8.5 inches tall. And it's in landscape orientation. So, okay, so I've got my nice big white piece of paper here. I am going to place my Google map, and it just throws it in there as big as it wants to throw it in there. So I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller so that we can see it. I have a nice big monitor, and if those of you that are viewing might be on smaller monitors, so it might be difficult to see. So I'm going to try to exaggerate kind of my my demonstration here. So things might be bigger than what I normally would do to create a map. So you can see the black square, and that's the size of my paper. And my map right now is just way too big for the size of the paper. And my, my root is actually even off the edges of the paper. So I'm just going to resize it. Come on. Let's make it a little bit smaller, actually. So this is where I say I sort of Frankenstein my map. I'm just going to squeeze it because they kind of get the gist even just by looking at the way it is here. And I'm going to try to center it a little bit more. And I make sure that it bleeds off the sides of my paper, because when I do convert it to a PDF, when I save it as a PDF, that all gets cut off. Okay, so this is my first layer. I talked to you a little bit about layers. This is my first layer. And in Illustrator, we have this little layers panel, and I'm going to rename this, because sometimes I will end up with something like 20 layers on my map. So I'm going to name it. So that's my Google map. I name it Google Maps, whatever. And Illustrator gives me the opportunity to lock the layer. So now I can do anything I want, and it doesn't move. I don't touch it. I can hide it if I don't want to see it, but that's not very useful right now. The other thing some people do is they might reduce the opacity to make it easier for them to see and to draw. I never really, I don't know, I don't think I did that. Maybe my eyes are bad. So then the next thing I'm going to do is create another layer. And for this one, I'm just going to do, and I did this route on purpose because there isn't a lot of land to outline. But I'm just going to show you how I outline this little False Creek area. So I'm going to call this my water, just to give it a name. I'm taking what is called the pen tool in Illustrator, and I'm going to make sure that my fill is empty because I just want to do the outline. So I'm just going to quickly, roughly, really draw. And it sort of gives you an idea that it's False Creek. I'm not even going to do Granville Island there. And because I'm really lazy, I use this little kind of soften the edge tool to make it, make the edges a little bit rounder. And I'm going to fill this water with gray because I don't use color, I use gray. So that's my water, and I'm going to lock that. And just to kind of give you an idea, that's what my map looks like so far. I've just got my little False Creek. And I kind of use that as, by putting like the bodies of water and having the land, it just kind of helps orient people to exactly what the map is, like what the map is showing them and where the locations are. So I'm going to try my next layer. And this one, I'm just going to do streets. And again, I'm taking my pen tool, and I'm going to start with Boundary Road. I'll make that one maybe a little bit wider because it's a bigger street. We're going to do Highway 1. Oh, and I forgot to turn off my fill. I do this about 100 times. Oops. I do this about 100 times when I do a map. I always forget to turn my fill off. So let's just go here. And there we go. So, and I kind of made a bit of a mess with that. This one curve. Okay. And it's a highway, so I make it a little bit bigger. And now let's just draw a few more streets so people are oriented. Let's do Main Street. It doesn't need to be quite as big, so I'm just going to make it maybe 2 points. Some of these I probably wouldn't make them quite as thick as you're seeing. Well, maybe I will. I don't know. It depends on my mood when I'm drawing my map. I'm hoping that you can see everything well enough so that you're at least getting an idea of how to draw your map. Oh, that wasn't a very straight street, but that's okay. So I've done a few maps running north and, or streets running north and south. Let's do Broadway. Could do Grandview Highway. Oh, let's do this one. Okay, so those are my streets. I won't do more because we don't want to be here all day just drawing streets. And then you're going to want to do the street names so that people know what the streets are. And Illustrator and I think most all design programs have a text tool. So I'm going to make these a little bit bigger so you can see it. So East Broadway is one of the names. Oops, that's not East Broadway, that's Grandview. Like I said, I didn't grow up in BC. How about Boundary Road? Let's do Main Street. It's kind of Grandview Highway. Oh no, it's better for our purposes. Okay, so I've got some street names. And now my favorite part, drawing the directions. Okay, so I'm starting at Vancouver Film Studios. And as you can, doing the fill again. Like I said, I'll do that 100 times when I draw a map. I've been doing these for years and I still do it. So as you've been seeing, I've been adding layers. Every time I add a new element, I put it on a separate layer. And you'll see in this case how it works. So for some people, when they draw the directions, they'll do like either a dotted line or a solid line. They'll make it large. You can do arrows. I copied what, again, that Master Tal that I worked with, who did those beautiful maps. I copied what he did. And so what I draw, I take a solid black line. You can copy your layer, lock the first one and put the focus on the second one. I like doing a white dotted line. And by doing that, I'm copying, if this is something that you'd like to do, you do your dark line first, your black line first. I've copied the layer, making a second layer with white, and now I'm making this one a little bit narrower, so that's how I have kind of my outline. Oops. I do rounded ends, and I make it a dashed line. And so I like this. For me, it shows sort of movement. I just think it kind of looks pretty. And then you want to show where your locations are. So this is Crew Park. Let's make that a black star, and I don't think we need an outline. I'm just going to copy that and make it where Vancouver Film Studios are. And that layer is my locations. And then I want to tell people what those locations are. So I create a little kind of a bubble, and this is how I do it. This is the easier way to do it. So I've just drawn a rectangle, and now I'm just using my pen tool to draw a little bit of a pointy arrow thing. And then I have this very cool Pathfinder tool, which will combine those two shapes together. So I love Illustrator, it's awesome. And that's my call out. And then I can add text. Park. And then I think the last thing I'm just going to show you here is you can do sort of your production info. And that's basically just kind of a box you can place. And here I'd say like name of production, the date, location and address. And that would all kind of go into your little sort of tag here. And of course you would add your directional arrow, your north arrow, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to draw a whole complete map. So this is kind of what your map looks like. I'm just going to increase it a little bit so that you can see it better. And then what happens is when you take away your Google Map, I've just hidden the Google Map. Before you create your PDF, you want to delete it so that it doesn't show up in as the back of your, as sort of a background in your final PDF. But this is basically what it is to draw a map. It's just, this looks kind of clunky right now, but you would spend a little bit more time trying to make it a little bit nicer maybe. But it's really just drawing a bunch of lines. And then, like I said, the beautiful thing is, like when I did my directions, I can duplicate layers. And say I'm filming at Vancouver Film Studios, and okay, today we're parking at the Tapestry lot. So I've got everything set up for Tapestry lot. But say maybe another day we're going to be parking at VCC, Vancouver Community College, which is around like Great Northern Way and Broadway. So what I would do is I could just delete the production info and all my directions, and I could just delete that crew park and the locations, and now I still have my map, and I would just take this same map and I would just draw the directions that go to VCC. And then someone had asked about converting it to a PDF. Export. Oh, I think I can just save it as a PDF. I haven't done this for a while. Oops. Save as PDF. And then you've saved it as a PDF. My PDF isn't coming up right now, but again, that's basically a map. So I'm going to stop my share, and so does anybody have any questions? Someone just asked in the chat, would this video be able to be saved and watched to use as a reference for when we do maps? Hope so, that would be super. That's my plan, and that's why I did it in a webinar format, so that I can post it on the DGC website if it did turn out okay. And once I watch it, we'll make that determination. If not, we can do it again and record it. But I really do want this to be a reference, because I think it's, you know, it can be really daunting, you know, when you're suddenly sitting there in front of a blank screen and going, what do I do? Hopefully this has given you at least some information on how you would go about starting to draw a call sheet map. Because yeah, I know being a TAL can be really overwhelming, and I want to make it as easy for you guys as absolutely possible. Are there any other questions that I can answer right now? We've got another 15 minutes, so I'm happy to answer questions, or if you're all figured you know everything and are done, then we can end the webinar. So I'll just give it a minute. If you want to type questions in the Q&A, go ahead. Just give it a couple more minutes. And if we don't see anything, then we'll just end the webinar. But I really appreciate you all joining me. I really hope this was helpful. Again, anything we can do to help people out there make their jobs a little bit easier is what we're trying to do. And again, I use Illustrator. It's really expensive. I would really try Inkscape. I think that's kind of your best way. Or, you know, Google. I'm sure there's other applications out there. I can't say that I'm the most well-versed on the graphic design programs out there, but so someone is asking, is there a DGC approved step-by-step process for map making? Also, will this webinar recording be published anywhere? There's no DGC approved. We're not your employers, so excuse me, we can educate you on what we know. I happen to work for the DGC, but I was a TAL and an ALM, so I have done it. So I'm kind of doing this as my as kind of my from my ALM and my TAL experience, and not as a member of the DGC staff. So there isn't, you know, we don't say you have to do it this way, or, you know, you can't do it this way. It's really up to you and your location manager, your ALM, your production manager as well, how they want your maps to look too. And I will try to publish this webinar on our website if it turns out okay. Another question is, does one get training on how to draw maps by DGC when one applies for TAL? No, it's, we have had a mapping course in the past. It ran briefly, but it was not super well attended. So what I did is I took, basically this presentation is one that I gave at the TAL class, and it went okay. I think it was helpful for those students, and my plan was to continue doing that, but now that we've been doing online training, I think this might be a better way of reaching everybody. So this webinar will, like I said, if it turns out okay, then we will go ahead and post it on the website. If it's not great, then we'll figure something out, but I do hope to eventually put this type of presentation on the website. And the other question that people tend to ask is, well, can the DGC teach us how to use particular type of software? And my answer to that is there are so many resources online that are free and are much better than probably what we could teach you. You know, you've got like a 5-minute video here, a 5-minute video there that you can watch, and you can learn so much. Matter of fact, in the training newsletter, I posted a link to a video that I found on how to draw maps. I think the guy's from Australia or something, and he shows you how to draw maps in Illustrator. And again, it's the exact same process that I just showed you. So there's so many good resources out there that I'd rather us spend our training money on how to do script breakdown or things specific to the DGC categories, where learning a piece of software, you can find so much online. Yeah, a lot of YouTube tutorials, absolutely. And somebody's mentioning Affinity Designer is a great vector program and isn't too expensive. Would recommend anyone curious to look into it. So Affinity Designer, AFFINITY Designer. Okay, that's a good one. Maybe I'll take a look at that one as well. But thank you for that suggestion. Like I said, there's probably others out there that I'm not aware of. Yeah, YouTube tutorials. Okay, so it looks like that's it for questions. Again, thank you so much everyone for joining us. I'll take a look at the video and hopefully we'll post it online on the DGC website. Or if it didn't work out so well, then we'll think of something else and we'll get something else posted, or we'll run another one of these tutorials of the webinar. So again, thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy your day. Thank you.